The air in the corner conference room on the 42nd floor was heavy with the smell of stale espresso and polished mahogany. Across the glass table, my husband of 11 years, Julian, casually adjusted his tailored silk tie, leaning back with a smirk that had taken him years to perfect. Beside him sat his mother, Eleanor, her manicured fingers tapping rhythmically against a leather folder. Julian's high-priced corporate attorney didn't even bother looking at me. He was busy humming quietly while stacking a neat pile of financial disclosures. "Let's be realistic, Clara," Julian said, his voice dripping with condescending pity. "You spent a decade organizing my calendar and hosting dinner parties. You didn't build Vanguard Tech. You don't own it. My mother and I built this empire, and asking for 40% of the equity is, frankly, embarrassing. Be grateful I'm covering your apartment lease for 3 months." Eleanor let out a sharp, amused chortle, adjusting her pearl necklace. "You were always a lovely trophy wife, dear, but trophies don't get seats at the board table. You're completely out of your depth." I looked at the three of them, the husband who thought he had erased me, the mother-in-law who treated me like hired help, and the lawyer who assumed I was helpless. The courtroom clock above the door ticked softly. Tick, tick, tick. My hands weren't shaking. My voice didn't crack. I slowly unclipped my silver fountain pen, laid it neatly beside my plain black folder, and smiled. "Julian," I said quietly, looking him straight in the eyes, "you forgot who set up your original Delaware corporate shell in 2018, and you certainly forgot whose family trust funded your initial patent filings." The smirk on Julian's face wavered for a fraction of a second. His lawyer froze mid-stack, his eyes darting toward me. But to understand how I ended up sitting at the head of this conference table holding the key to a $70 million holding company, we have to rewind the clock. When Julian and I met 12 years ago, Vanguard Tech was nothing more than an ambitious napkin sketch in a cramped basement apartment. Julian had the charismatic pitch deck energy, but he lacked operational discipline and legal foresight. I had just finished my master's degree in corporate finance and forensic auditing. I believed in his vision, but more than that, I believed in us as a team. For the first 4 years, I worked 16-hour days behind the scenes. I drafted the initial operating agreements, managed vendor contracts, balanced every ledger, and structured our early capital rounds. While Julian was out networking at tech galas, I was staring at spreadsheets until my eyes burned. When we got married, Julian promised that everything we built was our shared future. Then the real money arrived. Success didn't just change Julian, it distorted him. Slowly, the narrative began to shift. At company dinners, Julian would laugh and tell investors, "Clara keeps the house running so I can run the company." Whenever I tried to discuss equity restructurings or board seats, he would pat my hand and say, "Don't stress your head with corporate mechanics, honey. Let the legal team handle it." His mother, Eleanor, moved closer to our estate 2 years ago, and that was when the cracks turned into canyons. Eleanor had always viewed me as a middle-class intruder who got lucky. She began insisting that Julian protect the family legacy. Soon, subtle changes started happening. My access to primary business bank accounts was quietly downgraded to read-only. Quarterly financial reports stopped arriving at our home address. I sat at our marble kitchen island one evening, holding a bank notice showing a $3 million wire transfer out of our joint holding account into an entity called EV Holdings. "Julian, what is EV Holdings?" I asked when he walked in, smelling of expensive cologne and scotch. He didn't even pause. "Tax restructuring, Clara. My CFO and my mother arranged it. It's high-level wealth management. You wouldn't understand the tax implications." "We're married?" I said softly. "This is joint marital capital." He turned, his eyes cold and distant. "It's my company capital. Stop digging through my documents like a paranoid accountant." That night, lying awake in our 6,000 square foot home, I realized a terrifying truth. Trust had become the weapon Julian was using to blindfold me. He wasn't just managing the company without me. He was systematically erasing my footprint from the empire I had helped build. 6 months later, the trap snapped shut. I arrived home on a rainy Tuesday afternoon to find 2 men in suits moving boxes out of my home office. Julian was standing by the fireplace with Eleanor. On the coffee table lay a thick stack of papers. "What is this?" I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. "It's over, Clara," Julian said casually, taking a sip of sparkling water. "I've filed for divorce, irreconcilable differences." Eleanor didn't even hide her satisfaction. "The locks are rekeyed, dear. Your cards are deactivated and your personal items are being packed." I stared at my husband. 11 years, Julian? A stack of papers on a coffee table? "I've made a generous offer," Julian replied. "A lump sum of $200,000 and 3 months in a rental. If you fight this, my legal team will tie you up until you're bankrupt. You have no corporate standing, no IP rights, and no paper trail showing you own Vanguard. You're leaving with what you brought in." Eleanor leaned in. "You were a spectator in Julian's life. Accept the cash and walk away before you end up with zero." They expected screaming or tears. Instead, I picked up my handbag and looked Julian dead in the eye. "Okay," I said quietly. "I'll have my response delivered." What they forgot was who I was before becoming Julian's supportive wife, a forensic auditor raised by an IP attorney. They mistook my patience for ignorance. I moved into a small apartment and spent 4 months locked in a room with bank records, archived hard drives from 2018, and corporate filings. Tracking every wire transfer Julian made, I found the fatal flaw in his grand plan. To bypass paying my marital equity, Julian and Eleanor had transferred key proprietary algorithms from Vanguard Tech into EV Holdings 6 months prior. But when I pulled the original 2018 founder agreement, I found the master clause I had personally drafted. All core IP transfers required 2-factor authorization, including the signature of the corporate secretary. And listed as permanent corporate secretary was me. Julian had forged my authorization. Furthermore, Eleanor used $3 million from our joint marital account to fund EV Holdings, making it an illegal diversion of marital assets. I waited until the mandatory pre-trial financial settlement conference to strike. Sitting in that 42nd floor boardroom, Julian's lawyer cleared his throat. "Mrs. Vance, those early filings have been updated by our firm." "Updated, perhaps," I said, sliding the certified 2018 charter across the table. Section 4, paragraph B explicitly states that any transfer of core IP requires the written consent of the corporate secretary. Julian sneered. "Clara, that old paperwork is meaningless." "Page 4, Julian?" I interrupted. Look at the signature line. It's my name. Page 6 shows the IP assignment to EV Holdings 6 months ago without my signature. That transfer was fraudulent. I slid a second folder forward. This forensic audit shows $3 million moved from our joint account to fund Eleanor's entity. Vanguard Tech currently has an undisclosed cloud on its entire software stack. Silence descended. The lawyer flipped through the pages, color draining from his face. He leaned over and whispered, Julian, if these documents are authentic, your company doesn't own its software. You've committed corporate fraud. Eleanor gasped. That's absurd. She was just a housewife. I built the foundation you tried to steal, Eleanor, I said. Julian stood up, slamming his chair. Clara, stop. What do you want? My legal team filed an injunction 30 minutes ago, freezing all assets pending a full judicial audit, I replied softly. The board has already been notified. Julian collapsed back into his chair, pale and trembling. You ruined me, he whispered. No, Julian, you ruined yourself the moment you assumed my silence meant I was weak. To avoid criminal exposure, the board forced a complete restructuring. I received 50% of Vanguard Tech's valuation, a $35 million buyout, and full legal ownership of the original patents. Eleanor was forced to liquidate EV Holdings to cover court-ordered clawbacks. A month later, standing in my light-filled brownstone, I poured my morning coffee in peace. The greatest victory wasn't watching Julian turn pale or receiving the wire transfer. It was realizing I had taken complete control of my own story. Never confuse patience with weakness, and never let someone else decide your worth. Silence isn't surrender. Sometimes it's just the quiet before you take back your power. If this story resonated with you, please like, comment, and subscribe for more stories of justice and resilience. Thank you for listening.